the Ghana Revenue Authority, GRA, has confirmed that it will begin the implementation of the value-added tax reforms from 1st January 2026. This follows the passage and subsequent presidential assent given to the VAT Bill 2025. This development marks a significant overhaul to simplify the country's tax system, consolidate laws, abolish the COVID-19 levy, and improve compliance through digitalization in revenue administration. The law is also aiming for greater fairness and economic growth as the country makes progress to enhance domestic tax mobilization. The reform is part of the recommendations from the International Monetary Fund to reduce bureaucracies in tax collection. Key changes include unifying the flat rate system, reducing effective rates, allowing deduction of GET Fund and NHIL as input tax, and boosting revenue efficiency. This will also include the deployment of digital channels like eVAT for accurate collection. Speaking to journalists on the new VAT Commissioner for the Domestic Tax Revenue Division, Dr. Martin Kobil explains that customers will now be required to pay 20% instead of 21.9% on their goods and services. Now, Joy News Head of Research, Isaac Kofi Agyei, joins me via Zoom. Thanks for joining me, Isaac. Now, in real terms, how significant is this reduction for the average Ghanaian household?
Hi, Sheila, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, in fact, just like you said, this new reform of the VAT rate is expected to reduce the effective VAT rate from 21% to about 20%. So essentially, if you do the math, consumers are expected to save close to about 2% or 1.9% in terms of how much they pay as effective VAT rates. If you look at the current VAT system that we have, which the current government has called it draconian and a bit, distorted, in the sense that there is an element of tax on tax where if you buy an item, worth about 100 cedis, what you are currently doing is that you're paying, NHIL 2.5%, COVID-19 1%, and then you pay GET Fund of also 2.5%. This tax handle, in terms of how much has been deducted in terms of tax, is added to the original price of the product before a VAT of 15% is charged. Now, with this new reform, that approach is going to change. So the VAT of 15% will apply to the original product. If it's 100 cedis, it's 100 cedis. You don't add the tax component to that before that will be added. So from tomorrow, the expectation is that if you go to places like the mall, where VAT is very effective, if you buy any item worth about 100 cedis, previously you would have paid about 21 cedis in terms of 21 cedis, 90 pesos in terms of VAT tax. But with this new reform, you pay about 20 cedis. So essentially, you save about 2 cedis or 1 cedi, 90 pesos per every 100 cedis worth of good that you buy from tomorrow.
Well, that's good news for us, Kofi. So do these VAT reforms have the potential to ease cost of living pressures, or is the impact likely to be marginal given the current economic conditions?
Absolutely. 2 cedis on every 100 cedis worth of goods you buy is significant. And, a number of economists have actually complained about the cascading impacts in our VAT system. So essentially, for us to go through this whole process for a whole year trying to reform the VAT system shows that is significant. And in terms of businesses, for instance, this is not just to consumers. This VAT reform also applies to businesses. So the government's computation is that, with this new reforms, cost of doing business in Ghana is expected to go down by some 5%. And in terms of consumers, government is projecting that taking away the COVID-19 levy and also rationalizing, the NHIL and GET Fund from the base of the VAT calculation is expected to put back about 3.7 billion Ghana cedis in the pockets of businesses and individuals. So essentially, if you look at the numbers, this is very significant.
With the abolishing of the COVID-19 levy and reduced effective rates, can government, do you think, still meet its revenue target, or does this risk widening the fiscal gap?
Well, this is a very important question and a big gamble that the government has taken. We should note that this particular government has done a number of, tax abolishments. For the first one we saw was the betting tax, and then also the e-levy, which cost the government about 3 billion cedis, right? If you look at the current reform that government wants to do, it is really going to affect government's, tax revenue collection or revenue mobilization in 2026. But government is really banging its hopes on compliance because they believe that the distortions that currently exist in the VAT system isn't ensuring compliance. And so once they are able to go through with this new reform, the level of compliance is expected to increase. Now let's go into the numbers. If you look at how much this will impact the revenue, according to estimations done by the Ghana Revenue Authority and figures presented to the IMF, the expectation is that the removal of the 19 levy and then also the folding of the NHIL as well as the guest fund levies from the VAT system is expected to cost the government some 5.3 billion cedis. So government, by doing this, is forgoing about 5.3 billion cedis. And if you look at the VAT, remember that we are not only looking at the rates. The raising of the VAT threshold from 200,000 Ghana cedis to about 750,000 Ghana cedis simply means that government is also ready to lose some monies there. The estimated cost for raising the threshold of VAT by that margin is around 219 million Ghana cedis. That's also very, very significant. But if you look at the figures that GRA or the government presented to the IMF, they believe that once they are able to do this, there's also going to be high level of compliance. And so they believe that compliance, for instance, will bring in, some significant amount of money. Improvements in compliance, the government believe, will bring in some 1.6 billion cedis. And we should also note that, this current VAT system will mean that there will be zero VAT on, mining, exploration, and also recognizance. That will be zero VAT. That's also expected to cost the government. But the government is banking its hopes on compliance, which they believe, if it's able to go up, could bring in some 1.6 billion cedis. And then also, we should also know that whilst government is, rationalizing the VAT system, it's also removing import VAT exemptions for 347 products, from the ports and imported VAT exemption. That in itself is also expected to bring the government some 1.7 billion cedis. So you can see the net effect. Although government is foregoing huge sums of money in terms of the rationalization they've done, the expectation is that the removal of the VAT exemptions on some imported products and then also improvement in compliance combined is expected to bring the government more than 3.5 billion cedis.
So then how effective is the introduction of systems like e-VAT likely to be improving compliance, especially among SMEs and the informal sector?
Well, monitoring is very, very important in terms of the VAT collection. If you look at Ghana's tax revenue each year, the VAT component is very huge. And if you don't ensure compliance and if you don't ensure tracking and then also recording some of these monies, sometimes the government loses a lot of monies. And so the e-VAT system, is expected to increase compliance and then also, just like I mentioned, bring in some 1.6 billion. We also have to know that government is targeting VAT some, digital purchases. So if you are buying, items on digital platforms, government is hoping to start VATing, those items. And that in itself is also expected to bring in some money. And so with the introduction of the e-VAT system, which is already there anyway, but the government believes that with the removal of the COVID-19 levy and then also rationalizing the base of the VAT, compliance is expected to increase, and government's hoping to cash in about 1.6 billion from that aspect.
Kofi, since the reforms are linked to IMF recommendations, how much policy space does Ghana retain in shaping its tax system to suit local economic realities?
Well, I think government has done well with the calculations, and if you look at the IMF figures I'm looking at right now, the net effect is about 158 million Ghana cedis. So government is actually on the winning end, where they've forgone huge components, but this new reforms is expected to also still maintain about 158 million Ghana cedis. So in addition, if you combine the removal plus the exemption, taking away some exemptions, compliance and all of that, government is expected to add about 158 million Ghana cedis to a tax, revenue. And that is why you don't see the IMF complain about this. But it's a big gamble to be, hoping to generate huge amounts of money from compliance, because we've already seen it, where the expectation was that the removal of the e-levy and then the betting tax wasn't expected to really hurt government's revenue in 2025. But the figures we are seeing so far shows how, targeted revenue for 2025 have actually been below what government really expected. And so, well, I think that although you have a positive net of 158 million Ghana cedis, it is still a big gamble for government to be going on the tangent of, compliance and all of that. But one thing I see bringing in a lot of money to government is the removal of the, VAT import exemption of 347, product lines. And the IMF is aware of this. Government has done the math, and the net effect is expected to be about 158 million. So the IMF isn't really worried, because give or take, if you look at what government is doing, the expectation is that this is expected to increase, revenue by some 158 million Ghana cedis.
Now, Kofi, let's look beyond 2026. What impact could these VAT reforms have on investment, business confidence, and domestic tax mobilization?
Well, so the government's expectation is that they want to make the economy a business-friendly one. And so they've already done their computations, and the projection is that once government is able to go through this process and is able to bring on board this new exemption starting 1st January, the expectation is that cost of doing business in Ghana is expected to go down by 5%. And for anybody who is hoping to invest in Ghana and do business in Ghana, this is huge. And for the mining sector, for instance, government's argument was that because VAT was being applied, the expectation was that we didn't have a lot of, big mining firms coming into the country to do, explorations and then also recognizance. And the expectation that once you take away the VAT from that aspect, you're going to have more mining investors coming in. So this is how government is looking at it. And for those who are hoping to possibly invest in Ghana, cost of doing business, according to government, is expected to go down by some 5%. And for anybody who is hoping to do business in Ghana, that's very significant.
Well, thanks for joining us, Kofi. And that's Kofi Agyei, who is the head of research desk here at Joy News.